Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another video on History by Podcast. And today I'm joined by Professor Bart Ehrman, and today we're discussing his new course titled "The Genius of the Acts of the Apostles." So thank you for joining me today, Bart.
Okay, thanks for having me.
So what is so genius about the Acts of the Apostles?
Yeah, right. Well, people I think generally don't see much genius in it because they just read it. It's a book about the spread of Christianity, and it seems like okay, this happens, that happens, that happens. Okay, okay, okay. And so, but when you start digging into it, there's a lot going on there. I took a semester long course on the Book of Acts when I was in graduate school. And I was pretty astounded. I had read Acts for years at that point. I was astounded at what's actually going on in this text in terms of the way it develops its themes, the way it develops its theological understanding of the early church and of Jesus, and the perspectives pointed out. The literary aspects of it are especially brilliant, I think. And so I'll be talking a good bit about some of that stuff to show how this author really is doing very interesting things.
Did the author of Acts compose the Gospel of Luke?
Well, it's always been thought that the answer is yes. There are some scholars today who argue no. I would say that they are in the minority. I think there are very good reasons for thinking that the same author wrote both books. They ostensibly belong to the same author. The Gospel of Luke, the first 4 verses, begins with the author of Luke saying that many other people have written account of the things Jesus has said and done. He says, I followed all these things closely, and I'm going to write you an accurate account, O Theophilus, so that you can know really what happened. And so then, okay, so it's somebody writing to Theophilus about about the things that happened during the life of Jesus. When you get to the book of Acts, the first few verses of Acts says, the author says, so Theophilus, in my first volume, I said the things that Jesus said and done, and now I'm going to, and so like, it's clearly somebody claiming to be the same person. So I think the two options are either that somebody later had read Luke and wanted to add a second volume and forged it and claimed to be the same person who wrote the first volume. That's, it's possible. The other option is that there's simply 2 volumes of the same book. And the similarities between the books are of a certain character that make you think they are almost certainly the same author. They have the same themes, the same theologies, the same ideas, the same vocabulary, the same writing style. I mean, how much do you want? And so I think most people think they're the same author.
You have stated in the past that you think that the chapters 1 and 2 were a later insertion into Luke, and that Luke chapter 3 was the original beginning. Since Luke chapter 1 obviously contains the mention of Theophilus, is the author of Luke 1 and 2 who inserted the text into Luke, would that be the composer of Acts and therefore a different author from the original author of Luke 3 to 24?
That's a terrific question. And the reason you've asked it is because I'm always speaking in shorthand when I refer to this. So when I say that Luke 1 and 2 were later added to the text, I mean starting with Luke chapter 1, verse 5. Because the beginning, what I think happened is the first 4 verses were the prologue for the original Luke that starts in what is now chapter 3, verse 1. And so he started with that prologue, I said, and then boom, he gives you the dates in the 15th year of, so and so and so and so. And so when I'm referring to that, I'm referring to the birth narratives themselves, which start in chapter 1, verse 5, and go all the way to the end of chapter 2. So I think the original Luke started with the Theophilus bit.
Did someone called Luke compose the Gospel in Acts?
Well, it's one of the choices of all the hundreds and hundreds of names out there. This person may have had the name Luke, but it's not the Luke people say. So the Gospel of Luke gives no hints about its author, except for that he's a Greek-speaking Christian who's, you can say some rough things, but you can't say anything about his personal identity. There are 4 passages in Acts that that readers have always assumed are clues to his identity. These are the 4 passages starting in chapter 16 where the author starts speaking in the first person plural, where he's been talking about Paul and his companions on their missionary journeys. And then out of the blue, all of a sudden, he starts saying, we did this, we did that, we heard this, we heard that. And then it stops abruptly. And that happens on 3 other occasions at the end of Acts. And so the natural assumption that one would have is that this person who's writing this was one of Paul's companions. At certain points, he was along with Paul. And so that's the assumption. And so then you ask, well, okay, who would it be? We know of a number of companions of Paul. Well, Luke and Acts are really concerned about the conversions of Gentiles. So it makes sense that this is a companion of Paul who is concerned about Gentiles. He must be a Gentile. Okay, so in Paul's own letters, does he ever mention any Gentile companions? And he does mention a couple, and you can kind of, there are 3, and 2 of them don't work very well, but one of them fits. There's no reason this guy couldn't have been it, and it's a person in Colossians called Luke, the Gentile physician. And so people assume it's got to be a Gentile, it's got to be a companion to Paul. It's this guy, it's Luke. And so that's how you get his name. But the argument is deeply flawed on numerous levels. And so most critical scholars don't think so. So there are good reasons for thinking a companion of Paul did not write it. And this will be a major part of my course, which is that whenever Paul says something about himself that Acts also talks about, they disagree with each other. And on the assumption that Paul knew about his life, it's kind of probable that the other person got it mixed up.
And that goes in really well with my next question. Why does Acts not mention Paul's letters, and does it contradict the letters?
We don't know why it doesn't mention Paul's letters. My guess is that the author of Acts did not know the letters of Paul that we have. We have today, in the New Testament, there are 13 letters that claim to be written by Paul. Critical scholars tend to think 7 of those really were written by Paul. I think that there is nothing to suggest that this author knew those letters, because he doesn't rely on them at all. It looks like where he overlaps with them, he disagrees with them. And they disagree on major things, and that suggests that he didn't know the letters. But my guess is he just didn't know them. But there are some rather important things, including, for example, did Paul preach that Jesus' death was an atonement for sins? That's Paul's message in his writings. And in Acts, when he gives speeches to convert people, he doesn't say that at all. He has a different view about how Jesus' death worked. In Paul insists. When Paul talks about his conversion in Galatians chapter 1, and he says straight out, when I had my vision of Christ, I did not consult with anyone, and I did not go to Jerusalem to consult with the apostles. Okay, and he says, before God, I'm telling you the truth. Okay, I kind of believe that. It sounds like somebody's accused him of that, and he's saying, like, my God, that is not what happened. When you go to the book of Acts, what happens? He converts. The first thing he does, he consults with Ananias, and as soon as he leaves Damascus, he makes a beeline to Jerusalem to consult with the apostles. So, wow, really? So I think, so that's a place where, among many, where you can compare the two, and they seem to be at odds.
Why does Acts, let me rephrase, is Acts' portrayal of Paul's theological beliefs consistent with Paul's views in his letters?
Well, there are some things, of course, that are consistent. I mean, in both of them, he believes in the God of the Jews, and he's a Jewish follower of the God of Israel, and he was raised keeping the Jewish law, and he's a Greek-speaking person. There are things that are obviously big things that are in common, but there are lots of things that are very different. His proclamation is different in key ways. One of them being what I said before, is that in the book of Acts, when he tries to convert people, telling them about the importance of Jesus, he says nothing about Jesus' death being for your sins, to be an atonement for sins. Whereas in his letters, that's what it's all about. Or what about non-Jews? In the book of Acts, Paul says, well, you Gentiles, you pagans, you didn't know any better. I mean, how are you supposed to know the God of Israel is the right God? And so God overlooked your times of ignorance, but now you got a chance to repent because you just didn't know any better. And when you read Romans chapter 1, he says the opposite. These Gentiles, they knew full well that there's only one God, the creator, and they rejected their knowledge of God. And since they rejected their knowledge of God, God rejected them. He didn't overlook their ignorance. They were not ignorant. They knew what they were doing, and God punished them as a result. Well, it's just the opposite. So, no, I don't think Acts gets his preaching right when you get down to what he's actually trying to say.
I'd like to go back to what you were talking about earlier with the we passages when it switches to the we passages in Acts. What do you think of the argument that some scholars make that there's a we document that was stitched together with the rest of Acts when the canonical edition was created?
That's what I used to think, and it's what I used to teach. And I taught it for years because I thought it was probably right. There's probably some kind of itinerary out there or something. And I still think it's possible. But I think the reason it's implausible is because it really would have to be stitched in a peculiar way because there's no transitions. Um, all of a sudden, like the author's talking about Paul and the others, and then all of a sudden like out of the blue in the middle of an episode, and then it ends in the middle of an episode. So you don't get the episode, it's not, you don't get the whole episode. And it happens 4 times like that. So that looks weird. And so I started thinking maybe that's not the best solution. I mean, it's possible, but I started realizing that this idea of saying we or saying I in the middle of a document was used commonly in the ancient world to try and show readers that the person was who was there at the time and that it provided authorization. And so I pointed this out a number of times before, and I've always had people say, "Well, look, if this author wanted to prove that he's one of Paul's companions, he wouldn't just like a few times kind of sneak it in there at the end. He would go out of his way. Oh yeah, so I met Paul one day, and you'd kind of emphasize it, and that's how you would do it, right?" And on the surface, that sounds sensible, but you think about it for a second. You're saying that Luke would have been more successful if he had done it that way. How successful could he be? Everybody for 2,000 years has thought that Luke wrote it. I mean, that's pretty successful. You don't have to be in your face about it. And it's actually more effective if you're subtle about it. And so I think that's what he did. I think he just switched to the we passages in order to claim that he knew what he was talking about when it came to Paul because he was one of his companions.
And in my final question, what do scholars do when they go through Acts to try to figure out when it says something that is reliable about the historical Paul and when it does not?
Well, it's one of the major problems that scholars have to confront. It is usually thought that if Paul says that he was in Thessalonica with Timothy, that he went to Thessalonica. Then when he went to Athens, he went with Timothy. And when Acts says he definitely did not go with Timothy, that probably Paul's the one who got it right, and Luke's probably wrong there. So you have some things where it looks like, okay, he's wrong about that. It's probably wrong. He did not preach about atonement, the things like that. But the problem is that there's so much in Acts that um, that say things about things in Acts talking about Paul that Paul does not ever refer to, and it's hard to know. And so, for example, there are lots of things. People always think that Paul, for example, came from Tarsus. And they tend to think he got educated under Gamaliel in Jerusalem, that he had rabbinic training there. And they think that he went on 3 missionary journeys. And they think that he was a Roman citizen. These are all commonplaces with Paul. And Paul says nothing about any of that. Luke says it. When you can check Luke, he's inaccurate about details. So what do you do about the details where you can't check him? I think at the very least, you have to be very cautious and not simply assume that those things are accurate any more than the things you can check are accurate.
And I just want to tell everybody real quick if you want to go get the course, the affiliate link will be in the description below, and then also in the pinned comment as well if you want to go purchase the course, The Genius of the Acts of the Apostles. Thank you for joining me today, Bart.
It's been great. I'm really looking forward to this course. 8 lectures going deep into this stuff, and you're going to see Acts is really quite a book, quite an interesting book. So thank you for having me yet again.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.